Hello, everybody. Welcome to those who are just joining us for our webinar this evening on the Disney film Inside Out 2. We are just waiting a moment for people to join us, and we will get started. Okay. All right. So this is our Emotions Matter webinar that we're having this evening about the new Disney Pixar film. And before we get started, we're going to do some introductions. My name is Paula Tusiani-Eng. I am the founder and executive director of Emotions Matter. It's delightful to be with you this evening. Welcome wherever you're coming from. I'm here today with some of our volunteers from Emotions Matter, our panelists, Caitlin and Jesse, which I'll introduce in a few minutes. Welcome. And with our volunteer team, Sarah Rosenberg, our board chair, and Nicole, our volunteer team. And so we're just going to introduce Emotions Matter for a few minutes before we start. And I'm going to share my slides now. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us on this Monday evening for our special webinar discussion. We invite you using the chat that's open tonight to let us know where you're coming from. And we welcome you to our community. Emotions Matter is a 501c3 nonprofit organization to spread hope and healing for people impacted by BPD. Our mission is to support, educate, and advocate so that people can live a meaningful life and work toward recovery and experience the fullest life that they want to live with BPD. We do this through peer support and education, and we invite you to go to our website to learn more about our services. A little bit about our structure this evening. This is a webinar format, so this means that you'll have an opportunity to comment in the chat on what you hear during the course of our discussion. We do have a moderated discussion for about the first 30 to 40 minutes, but you'll be invited to comment and ask questions, and we'll go over the instructions a little bit later. And then there'll be some time at the end for open Q&A.
These are our guidelines for our support groups. We know this is not a support group, but we want you to be respectful in the chat. We accept difference and promote acceptance based on gender, identity, race, ethnicity, age, sexuality, religion, or politics. Respect confidentiality, avoid assumptions or judgments about other people's experience of BPD, show kindness and compassion. No one person should monopolize the chat, and avoid explicit expressions of self-harm or trauma, which may be upsetting to others. And your safety is very important to us. If your emotions escalate, we're not able to comfort you. We'll encourage you to reach out to your support system or consult with a mental health professionals. We offer support just as people with lived experience. We have some disclaimers here. We have a BPD spectrum disclaimer. We know that BPD is a spectrum disorder. Everyone is at a different place on the spectrum based on how the symptoms present and how it affects their thoughts, behaviors, and daily living. This is a safe place for all people wherever you are on the spectrum. One person's experience of recovery does not represent all. Disclaimer on recovery. Emotions Matter intentionally uses the word recovery because we believe with support and treatment, people with BPD can get better, and our goal is to offer hope. However, we understand that not everyone identifies with the word BPD recovery. Some prefer living a meaningful life or managing our symptoms, and we respect where everybody is on the journey and how each person defines their own narrative. We're not here as healthcare professionals, but we are here as peer leaders. We identify with BPD either as individuals or as family members. We speak as experts of our own lived experience, not as medical experts. And if you have a medical question about BPD, we advise that you consult a healthcare professional. And we have some instructions here. If you have any comments, please enter them in the chat. However, if you have a specific question that you want us to ask the panelists at the end, please enter it into the Q&A box because that's what we're going to be looking at specifically. So when our presenters are finished, the questions will be answered from the Q&A box and we'll direct it to our presenters and they'll give us their answers. They'll do their best to answer the questions, but we may not get to all of them in the allotted time. If you have a question that is not answered, Please email Emotions Matter and we'll follow up with you after the presentation. Our email is info@emotionsmatterbpd.org.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So Inside Out 2 is the sequel to the Disney Pixar animated film that just came out, and it's a sequel from the first Inside Out, which came out in 2015. And years after the first, Disney decided to produce a new film. They consulted with psychologists to explore how to accurately portray teenagers' emotions and the changes that teenagers go through during puberty and adolescence. And so this new film just premiered in June of 2024, and it's received positive reviews from critics and the public worldwide. In fact, it's grossed over $1.6 billion and has quickly become the highest grossing film in Disney Pixar history. It has hit a cultural nerve. Even in the Sunday Times and the New York Times, there's all kinds of articles that are coming out about how Disney Pixar has helped change therapy. And it's hitting this cultural nerve in our society. But for many people living with borderline personality disorder or not, it resonates because BPD is a disorder which is rooted in emotions and how emotions are experienced and expressed. And some of the terms in the film, kind of relate to BPD. And so many people in our community who've seen this film, the light bulb has gone off, and we've decided what a great opportunity in this midsummer season to have a conversation about our own experiences of this film. And so today I invited two members from our community who are volunteers to join us in this webinar discussion. So first, Caitlin and then Jesse, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to BPD?
Hi, I'm Caitlin and I'm from Ontario, Canada. I'm 35 years old. I have borderline personality disorder and I was diagnosed about 10 years ago with the disorder and had symptoms long before that, but was diagnosed about 10 years ago. And I've been a volunteer with Emotions Matter for about 3 years now, which has been super meaningful for me. And I also, in terms of my connection with BPD, I also write about my lived experience with BPD for The Mighty, and I have self-published 2 books on my personal experience.
And I'm Jessie. I'm from Reading, Pennsylvania, and I'm 31 years old. I was diagnosed with BPD in 2021. So yep, it's been only about 3 years for me, really finding out, why I've really struggled with my mental health throughout, most of my adult life in particular. So, and I have been absolutely grateful to Emotions Matter because I discovered it weirdly enough because when I was diagnosed, it was one of the resources, or it was connected to a resource that I saw at the back of Borderline Personality Disorder for Dummies book that I got from Barnes and Noble. So I've been really excited to utilize the resources through Emotions Matter, especially the peer support groups. I definitely attend those regularly. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Jesse. We're glad that we've been a part of your journey and you're a part of ours. So we're glad that you can be here tonight, and Caitlin as well. And so how did you feel when you heard Disney Pixar was putting out a sequel to Inside Out?
I was really hopeful that was happening. Just the fact that there even was an Inside Out 1 was amazing. I still am kind of in awe that there is a movie that talks about emotions right now, because certainly when I was growing up and when I was a youth, there was nothing like that with Disney. There was nothing like that at all that I was exposed to. So it brought me a lot of hope that I guess the first one was successful enough that they could create a second movie. And I continually feel more hopeful because it's been so popular, as Paula was saying at the beginning, and it's had such good reviews. And that makes me really, hopeful is the word, about the future for helping kids and families and adults understand their emotions better.
Tessie, anything to add?
Oh yeah, like I agree with Caitlin that and yeah, in 2015 actually I was towards the end of my college career and I feel like at the time I wasn't diagnosed with BPD, but I really struggled for yeah, like many years with the only diagnoses I had up until that point was major depressive disorder and anxiety disorder. And so I felt like, especially when the first movie came out, like my first thought was, oh, wow, like making a movie that was accessible for young people as well as like through adults to explore all of these mental health type themes. Uh, I just thought that that was amazing in general and such a unique idea for Disney to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's always incredible when you can kind of see yourself in a film or in the arts, right? And you use that as a way to kind of reflect on your own experiences. And so let's get into the film a little bit, and I'll just give everybody a little synopsis. I'm not sure for people that joined us this evening how many people have seen the film or not, but I won't do too many spoilers, but just give a little synopsis so we have some context. So the main character of the film is a young woman named Riley. And Riley has moved to San Francisco, and she is now 13, entering high school. This is where the sequel begins. And her childhood emotions that were featured in the first film, joy, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, they're still present, but she's starting to feel new emotions as she enters adolescence. And this is disrupting her internal sense of herself, right? And it's challenging some of her core beliefs because it's just everything feels mumble jumbled inside, right? And joy, who's one of her internal emotions, wants her to have all of these positive experiences and memories and emotions, and for her to block what she's feeling that is negative. And so, in the context of the movie, Riley and her friends, named Bree and Grace, are invited to a weekend ice hockey camp to qualify for the high school team. So, as you can imagine, this now leads to a lot of social complications and some social anxiety. And her emotions are all over the place. She overreacts to some new emotions that are introduced, called anxiety, envy, embarrassment, and meh, and they start to clash with some of the original emotions. And so this sets the stage for Riley entering adolescence, and it causes some changes in her personality and how she kind of copes with life. And so this is just a brief synopsis, and now we could dive in a little bit. And so, just in general with this film, this theme of emotions and adolescence, like emotions get more complex as we become adults. In your lived experience of BPD, does this ring true for you? And how did this concept, as somebody with lived experience, resonate for you and your experience?
For me, like there was so much of that I could relate to, just, all of the experiences and the emotions that Riley has in the film as she approaches adolescence they're emotions that I would have felt then as a young person, but they're emotions I feel now as an adult too. So they're really universal at all stages of life. Where it differs a little bit for me is that, like, as someone with BPD, I think that I was experiencing a lot of those more intense emotions at probably even a younger age than what Riley experienced. It wasn't like for me, like at puberty, like in the movie, things just kind of changed. For me, it was something that I experienced as far back as I can remember. So that was a little bit different. But again, it's not a movie about BPD, it's a movie about emotions. So although I could relate to that, there would also be those differences because of, the lens that I'm watching it with and reflecting on. Mhm.
Yeah, I can really relate to Caitlin as well because I didn't know at the time of, yeah, definitely like being 13 years old if we're relating to where Riley is in the movie and her life journey. At that time, I knew too that I liked how Caitlin worded it, that like my emotions did feel like they were more intense than others. I remember being told a lot of the times by either like loved ones, like either my parents or like my younger sister and peers my age, that it's like, oh, you're blowing things out of proportion a little bit, or like it's not as big of a deal as you're making it, like especially when it came to things that I would get angry about, like if 13-year-old me could be like any of the, I guess, like core or like original emotions from the first movie, I probably would have been anger because a lot of things just kind of like made me explode. And yeah, they were things that were seemingly like not as big of a deal to others as they really were to me. And it would appear that I would have these like kind of outbursts like out of nowhere, but then it was something that really meant more to me than others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for enlightening us on how BPD differs from, say, normal hormonal shifts that could happen during adolescence or normal adolescent development, right? So for people with BPD, the neural circuits of your brain are not wired the way a neurotypical brain is, right? And so it's more challenging to regulate emotions, and that can start at a very young age. And so just to highlight that the experience that Riley has in the film is something that you had as a child, or you may have experienced much younger than 13, but you didn't have a name for it, right? You didn't know how to understand it. And so, yeah, thanks for highlighting that important distinction. Now, how did you feel about the new emotions that were introduced in this film? Anxiety, envy, boredom, apathy, embarrassment, nostalgia. I mean, which ones resonated, and what did you think about them introducing these to sort of capture some of the challenges of adolescence or emotional development?
I think they did such an amazing job with showing those emotions in like a tangible way. So like embarrassment arrives and we see the actual biological changes that happen when you're experiencing embarrassment or shame. So the emotion in the movie turns red, he hides his eyes, which are all those are behaviors that we engage in when we're experiencing those emotions. So I thought it did just such an amazing job at actually showing what that looks like for people, and being able to give a name to it, because there's that saying, like, if you can name it, you can tame it. And I think that's kind of like the gift of what that offers. In terms of the one that resonated with me the most, all of them. But I was very happy that envy was included, because I kind of thought to myself that it wouldn't be there, because to me envy seemed like a grown-up kind of emotion, though it's not, like people experience envy from a young age. Anybody that's ever compared themselves to someone else and wanted something that someone else had might be experiencing the emotion of envy. And for me, it's an emotion that I think I judge myself the most for having, because I think it has kind of a negative connotation associated with it, even though I know it's valid and all of these things I know on an intellectual level, it's still something I would judge myself for experiencing. So that resonated with me the most, to just see it there in a tangible way, and that helping to remind myself that it's an emotion that all people experience, and it's not bad just because it's unpleasant to feel.
Thanks, Caitlin. Jesse, do you want to build on that at all or comment?
Oh yeah, like I think that that the first movie and the second movie both especially do a great job of, since I mean it is inside out, and the whole like headquarters thing for me I think is super cool, because like not only does it have the emotions like at the console where like it's kind of like controlling what happens then on the outside with Riley, but then all of like the little orbs that like make up like what's internally going on too with her, and like not only the core memories, but then also in the second movie, for those who haven't seen it, not giving too much of a spoiler, but there's almost like this tree thing that is like at the center of headquarters that is essentially Riley's sense of self. And at first it really seems like that she's one way, like kind of like either pre-puberty or like right at the beginning of puberty, and it kind of evolves throughout the movie, so I won't give away the spoilers with that. um but yeah, I think that as far as the emotion goes, that I mean, like Caitlin said, I feel like all of them really in some way pertain to like experiences with BPD. However, for me, I feel like because of having such big emotions all my life, and not really especially not really understanding exactly why, or like having an explanation why till adulthood, I felt a lot of like embarrassment and shame,
Mhm.
especially if I would have outbursts like in public, like especially like either at school or things like that, like, and feeling like that other kids or like my teachers, like my parents sometimes, or other adults didn't understand why like the behavior was happening, like especially either getting angry. I've always been a very like emotional person, like I think yeah, earlier, or like at one point when I was talking with about this movie with other people, how like you ugly cry at the emotional parts of the movie. And yeah, like I've always had that experience, like when I'm sad, or like even when just like a beautiful piece of music or a beautiful movie is there, like end up crying. But anyway, I was digressing a little bit, but um how that links to embarrassment or shame for me, like specifically the word shame, is that internally like beating myself up for, oh, like either it's not appropriate, or like I'm not allowed to, or it's not expected of me because of either like societal expectations or how we're supposed to act in public to have these big emotions. So like
Yeah.
the internal struggle of like beating yourself up, and yeah, having those beliefs that it's not okay to feel
So
those
this
big emotions.
So this
Yeah.
film gave a name and a voice and characterization visually to some emotions that we don't often talk about, like jealousy and shame, anger. Usually these things have somewhat of a negative connotation, but they're very common to the BPD experience, and they're very normative, and they don't always have to be negative. It's very normal to sometimes desire what you don't have, and especially if you're struggling with being able to express yourself, jealousy can be a sign that something is not right in you, right? Or something is not right in a relationship. And shame, and acknowledging shame or being aware of shame, can also be sort of a self-reflection that you need to do something in your life, or talk about something, or bring it out in therapy, or whatever it is. So the film sort of gave a name to something that you experience, and it allowed you to be able to see it, and maybe opened it up for maybe other people that might not be used to naming or experiencing these types of emotions on a regular basis, that are very common to some of the BPD experiences. Um, and so with BPD, one of the symptoms that we talk about is emotional dysregulation, right? People with BPD can experience emotions intensely. Um, and can be sensitive to emotions and emotional reactions. So how did the movie hit the mark for you around describing emotional regulation or dysregulation, right? So how emotions become elevated, and then how it's hard to come back to baseline, you know, when we experience emotional dysregulation.
Mhm.
In your lived experience, is this true to how Riley experienced it, et cetera?
I think there is a very, without giving away again too much information about the film, but also needing to talk a bit about the film to explain, there is a very obvious scene in the film that I think captures an experience of emotion dysregulation that I think a lot of people would relate to, whether you have BPD or not. You know, when we experience our emotions becoming more intense, there's, you know, different physiological changes that happen. There's different things you can actually see if you're looking at someone who's experiencing dysregulation at a high level. So we do see this in the movie, you know, with Riley, you know, at one point, like she's sweating, you know, that's an observable thing. She's having a lot of racing thoughts. She's shaking a little bit, and she's trying to ground herself. And I think that was what they were trying to show. They were trying to show an experience of dysregulation, I think, with that. In terms of how it would relate to my lived experience, there would be some differences. So the types of triggers that would impact me to get to that point would be different, perhaps than the ones that Riley experiences. And I think what they're trying to show in the movie is kind of like an anxiety attack, and that's not how I would describe my experiences of heightened dysregulation. For my experience, it would more relate to one of the 9 criteria of BPD, the 9th one, which is transient stress-related paranoia and severe dissociative symptoms. I do want to say not everyone with BPD has this symptom because you need 5 criteria to have a diagnosis, but this is one that I've experienced a lot in my life that would be more representation of what emotion dysregulation looks like for me. So that would be kind of how it differs from the film.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah, for me, as Caitlin was talking and listening to the questions revolving around emotion regulation, what kind of stood out to me, especially since Riley is going through this like kind of transitional period between being like a young like preteen and then like now going into her teenage years, and how her relationships really have changed. I think her interpersonal relationships that are shown in the film really kind of contribute to her emotion regulation, because she goes from having like her 2 friends that she kind of were best friends with since they were really young, and then now trying to fit in with like the high school cool girls on the hockey team. And we see inside her head, like in the headquarters, how especially like anxiety is portrayed in the film as kind of taking over and being like, well, if we don't act this way and say this thing, and like Envy mentions about like, oh, we need to do our hair like the like the other girls to be able to fit in. I think that is a very common experience, at least I know for me when I was younger, like fitting in with everybody else, especially like when you're going off to high school, like you don't want to be the odd one out. And I think that because that she was going through that inner like turmoil of, well, do I stick with my like other friends that really seem to be my genuine ones, or do I decide to like do this other path where I'll fit in with these other groups? I think that led to ultimately like the anxiety attack scene. and having the difficulties with regulating and the interpersonal skills that were, yeah, having that rocky
Right.
experience with her.
So what I hear you saying is that when our emotions become elevated, it's not always about ourselves. Sometimes there's something in the environment that can set us off, right? Whether it's stress, whether it's interpersonal relationships, environmental triggers, right? And so that it did show that in the film, right? That it wasn't just about what Riley was experiencing on the inside, but it was how her emotions was trying to interpret social communication and social stressors. And so it's kind of helpful to have that perspective because, you know, I think sometimes with BPD, people are always blaming the person, but it's a combination of how the person is wired internally to also then interact with the outside world and how the outside world affects the person, right? And how that can trigger all kinds of interior interpretation of social cues and emotions, et cetera. And so let's talk about anxiety for a minute. In the film, anxiety is very much seen as the villain, the big bad guy, right? And I think in our prep for our conversation tonight, you know, you spoke a little bit about how the film identifies positive and negative emotions, right? So what was your take on this about the existence of anxiety and, you know, this invasion of other emotions into Riley's headspace and reality?
It's interesting. I went back to watch the movie again. So I saw it in theaters and then I rewatched it the other day. And what stuck out to me about anxiety the second time, the character of anxiety and the emotion of anxiety in the movie, is how much anxiety is really just trying to help Riley. Anxiety is like the problem solver. It's energy. There were so many things I wrote down when watching it where anxiety, the lines that anxiety had in the movie was like, I'm just trying to help her prepare for the future. I'm just trying to help her, you know, I want to keep her safe, you know, and I think like that's such a helpful way to reframe anxiety, because it removes the judgment piece, it normalizes it. And I honestly didn't notice it the first time I watched it as clear as the second time. And I think, you know what, that helps me as an adult, you know, because even though I've done so much therapy and treatments and all this stuff, still, if I'm experiencing intense anxiety, I'm like, this is bad, this is against me. Like that's my go-to automatic kind of thought. But the way it's portrayed in the film is that anxiety is just trying to help Riley, you know, she's trying to problem solve. And I think that way of looking at it for ourselves is, you know, just more effective, you know. It's going to happen, and you know, it's maybe just trying to give us information and help us out in some way. So yeah.
Yeah, very much so. And like, I guess speaking to the villainy, I guess you could say, of anxiety in the film, what stuck out to me was the scene where like anxiety was kind of like on this big screen and there were all like these little workers in their cubicles, like taking like all the different scenarios that might happen but like might not even really happen in real life. But again, like anxiety was trying to help Riley, like to be able to prepare for anything and everything that might happen. And as I was watching that scene, I thought about my experience with BPD, and anxiety sometimes is just that like it feels like it completely takes over, and it's difficult to be able to reason through anything else and to like think about anything else, and thoughts can sometimes be racing at 100 miles per hour that are not always, yeah, like, well, yeah, like most of the time very like negative and like induce fear. So yeah, like I really thought that that scene resonated well as somebody with BPD, because like, and not just anxiety, sometimes other emotions do just like really take over and can be detrimental. And at the same time, I like that Caitlin highlighted how, yeah, like there is a purpose for each of our emotions, even the ones that sometimes, like a lot of the time, feel uncomfortable and negative and icky. Like, as I said earlier about anger, like I still, even though that I've been through so much therapy myself and like gone through learning about myself and how to regulate my emotions, I struggle so much with anger because to me a lot of the time still I'm like, what kind of positivity has this brought for me? um but yeah, I'm trying to learn that every emotion has its purpose. And at least like one of the things that has been really helpful for me from my therapist in particular about anger is that it lets you know when like, yeah, like you really care about something.
Mm-hmm.
And that, yeah, like gets you geared up and like ready to defend like whatever it is that like you're passionate about, or like an injustice that might be happening in your environment. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the movie does a really good job at showing that all emotions, it's normal to experience the wide range of emotions that we have. You know, as human beings, we don't live in a constant state of joy. It's just not, it's not humanly possible not to sometimes feel normal human, disappointment and anger and, and sometimes not to feel anything, like it's very normal. And I think the film does a good job at being able to say, even at one point, right, Jesse, you brought this out, when we had our prep session around, there's a scene in the film where they say, you can't suppress us, like all the, because joy is trying to stop the other emotions from kind of invading Riley's headspace. And you can't suppress all these emotions, right? Anger is a normal part of the human condition. And and sometimes it's to acknowledge that things are not right in the world, that things are not right in relationships. It doesn't mean that we want to overreact and inflict anger on others, right? So everything has a consequence, and we want to be mindful and self-reflect. But yeah, there is a range of emotions, and some are going to be positive, and some are going to be more neutral, and some are going to be more negative. But they're all part of the human condition, right? And life is about like learning to experience and manage our emotions. Um, and so, okay, so we talked a little bit about interpersonal relationships. And so let's talk a little bit about coping mechanisms, right? I know Caitlin talked a little earlier on about the scene in the film where Riley is having a panic attack, you know, um, and she used certain, coping mechanisms to regulate her emotions. How did you feel about this scene as people with lived experience of BPD that have to engage in your own toolbox to regulate emotions? And what was in Riley's toolbox versus, what's in yours?
Like my lived experience would be, in terms of coping mechanisms, would be quite different from the movie. I thought like the movie did a really lovely job at demonstrating those things. And there's this lovely scene near the end of the movie where like the I want to say the other emotions that are not anxiety kind of engage in having more compassion for anxiety, and helping anxiety when anxiety kind of runs away with itself, telling it to sit down, have some tea, take a deep breath. And I think that those are really useful strategies for a lot of people. However, like in my own lived experience, it's not that simple to just sit down and have a cup of tea. It takes a lot of work, and it takes being extremely diligent to function with this disorder. It takes like a lot of prevention, I think, which movie doesn't talk about. You know, it takes time as well. Like, I've been living with this for a long time, so it takes just experience and time, knowing your triggers and coping ahead when you know more stressful events are going to be happening. And acceptance, you know, acceptance is a huge part of how I cope. So those kind of things would not be discussed in the movie, but would be a little bit different from my lived experience. Also, like, reminding myself I'm not alone, you know, is a huge part of how I cope, which isn't explicitly talked about in the movie, even though it's a movie for everybody and it's trying to show that we all have those experiences. I think it's different when you have this disorder that is still very highly stigmatized in some places, you know. So sometimes the way I cope with that is reminding myself I'm not alone, you know, and I find that very helpful. So.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with Caitlin in that, like, this about the statement of that, well, and obviously it's a movie, so like we couldn't spent a lot of the time just having Riley go from like the panic attack to coming back down to baseline. Uh, but yeah, I agree that, like, certainly in my experience, coming down from intense emotions like that doesn't happen that quickly, even when using skills. Um, and that's something that yeah, like, I really actively try to work on accepting about myself, that it's okay to feel the intense emotions and to go through it. Like, if it's, for example, the anxiety, um, but then, yeah, using the coping skills that, like, I've learned, and also, like, I'm still actively a part of, a BPD, or I'm sorry, a DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, skills group, that I go to weekly right now. And yeah, I highly recommend that for anyone, especially who has diagnosis of BPD, because it's definitely really helped me out, to be a part of it. And yeah, has taught me those coping skills, about what to do when anxiety strikes, when anger takes over, when you feel so sad or depressed that it feels like you can't get out of that. And yeah, like, I think the movie definitely portrayed, like, a little sprinkle, if you will, of those types of things, for someone like Riley, who, I can make the assumption that perhaps she doesn't have BPD. But yeah, like, definitely in real life, it's different, and it takes